To say that small businesses have had a rough 18 months would be putting it mildly. The Federal Reserve estimates that hundreds of thousands of businesses that would have otherwise survived closed permanently last year thanks to the pandemic. And most of them were smaller companies with entrepreneurs of color hit hardest. At this point, here in Massachusetts, Black and Latino residents are less than half as likely to own a business than their white counterparts. That's according to a recent report from Mass Inc. That's part of why a coalition representing entrepreneurs of color is calling on Beacon Hill to make a major investment in those companies. The Coalition for an Equitable Economy is asking state lawmakers for more than $1 billion of the state's total $5 billion in federal stimulus money to go specifically toward helping struggling small businesses and those owned by people of color from falling even further behind. Joined now by one of its leaders, Segun Idowu, who's also the executive director for the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, and State Senator Eric Lesser, who's on the State House committee that oversees the federal stimulus funds. Segun and Senator, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Segun, what's your case for the $1 billion?
Well, if the Commonwealth wants to continue to take credit for a strong economy, it's going to be important that we're investing in our Black and brown businesses. It's as simple as that. Our businesses contribute billions of dollars to our economy, and right now they're under threat of closing for good, the vast majority of them. And so for us, $1 billion is a low amount to ensure that we're helping to stabilize these businesses, but it's critically important that we do it as soon as possible.
So far, do you think you're being taken seriously by Beacon Hill, Segun?
I believe we are. We have partners like Senator Lesser, who I'm happy to share this conversation with today, and others on the House side who are readily open to hearing how we actually implement something of this nature.
Well, Senator Lesser, I'm glad to hear you're on board, but you are one of several hundred who are needed. How seriously beyond, well, why are you taking it seriously? Let's start with you before we talk to your colleagues. Why are you on board?
Well, I think because it's obvious that it's necessary. Look, the businesses and the sectors that were the most impacted by COVID, they were the customer-facing, in-person businesses, the restaurants, the nail salons, the barber shops. Those were the ones that were shuttered at the same time that Amazon and Costco and Home Depot saw record profits and record volumes. So I think people have seen this with their own eyes. And one of the blueprints we've got, Jim, is the work we did on the Economic Development Bill in January, where we actually wrote into the law a requirement that the Mass Growth Capital Corporation and the other grant-making agencies really take into account the diversity, the socioeconomic conditions, the gateway cities, the immigrant communities that were hit hardest by both by the virus itself and by the shutdown measures and the containment measures that came after that.
What are you hearing from your colleagues? And I don't mean the rhetoric. I mean, what are you hearing in terms of hard numbers and votes from your colleagues, Senator?
Well, it's $1 billion request, but it's about 20%, give or take, a little bit less than 20% of the total allotment that's coming from the federal government. So it feels appropriate. There are a lot of other needs. We've got needs around housing. We have needs around transportation investments that are important too. So what I think we need to do, and what my colleagues are doing right now, is thinking through, okay, you've got a broad set of needs here. What do you prioritize? $5 billion gets spent very fast if you don't set some priorities. But the point is that the money was given by the federal government to correct the biggest deficiencies and the biggest damage from COVID. And it's undeniable that that's been in our gateway cities and in our minority and immigrant populations.
Segun, on this show we've talked, and on the radio, we've talked to people from the Globe, from GBH, who've done research on contracting, state and city, with minority contractors. And the numbers 10 times better than I. The ones that come quickly ahead, I think it was earlier this year, cities spending, as in Boston, roughly $2 billion a year. I think 1.2% went to Black and Hispanic businesses. I'm pretty good at math. And if you increase that to 10%, which is still smaller than the share of the population represented by such people, you'd add somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 million. Is focusing on getting those contracts right and more diverse in terms of outflow part of the solution here, even if the money doesn't come from the stimulus pot?
Well, it is a piece of the solution here. So, of course, the upfront capital infusion that we're pushing for is incredibly important to make sure that we have more and more businesses that are available to do the work that the city or the state put out. But absolutely, as an organization here at BECMA and our partners in the Coalition for an Equitable Economy, we completely understand and keep pushing for the fact that our public sector, our government, needs to invest more in our businesses, not just through these grants and loans, but also in giving business and doing business with our businesses. They help to stabilize our businesses and they allow them to scale up and do more work across the state.
Senator, I will tell you something that is not news to you. Your chamber is not a very diverse kind of place. Does that make, in your estimation, your colleagues less receptive to a plea like this for entrepreneurs of color?
Well, the Senate has included actually in various different vehicles requirements around contracting and diversity in contracting. We actually included in the previous economic development bill we did in January a requirement. It didn't end up on the governor's desk. But we're going to go back at it. I'd actually like to expand this even further, Jim. And Segun and I have talked about this in the past. We've got to encourage diversity in all types of contracting. So one example is the state pension fund. It shouldn't just be, and of course, the blue collar workforce, very important to have diversity there, but you also need diversity with the accountants, the lawyers, the financial managers. So we've got a long way to go across all of those measures. Again, the Senate included in the economic development bill in January that requirement. My hope is that we can include some level of that in the next budget vehicle we do. But I do think that it's something that's rising in consciousness and in importance with my colleagues and certainly with me.
But, I'm not very good at Nostradamus kind of stuff, Senator, but it seems to me you mentioned competing needs. But, if I just added up the people who've been on this my radio show with Marguerite and the television show, I'm guessing, I don't know, $25 billion of
probably more
of
actually,
needs.
Jim, yeah.
Well, probably more. I mean, from the governor has told us, and he's told you what he's looking for. Michael Curry from the League of Community Health Centers talking about his health equity initiatives, businesses in general. The unemployment insurance fund, they're worried, needs $2 billion or whatever. Right. Well, I guess this should be directed to you, Segun. Don't you see the outcome of this likely being there are a lot of competing interests. Yours was really important to us. We can't come close to the billion you say you need, but here's X. Isn't that where this is going to end up? Doesn't it always end up like that?
Well, we're looking for a down payment. And to be honest with you, as we're as a state talking about equity, for us, we want the state to approve it. And I think this is one way to show that we truly, as a Commonwealth, believe in equity. Our businesses aren't, we have to think about this. Our businesses are the ones that employ the majority of Black and brown people.
Sure.
They invest so much in our communities. And so if we want to address all these other issues that you brought up, our businesses are the place to start. It's also where we seek community, whether it be our restaurants, hair salons, barber shops. Our businesses play a critical role. It's not a separate entity in this conversation. It's a part of it. And so we need to invest greatly in saving these businesses.
Senator Lester, speaking of competing demands, I know it's ridiculous to say, can you rate things? But generally, how high on your personal list is the request of Segun and his colleagues in this coalition? Where does it fit on that?
I chair the Economic Development Committee, so it's very high on my list. Again, we did this a large portion of this was really the test run was the Economic Development Bill we did in January. And by the way, about almost 50% of the money that has been allocated through those small business assistance programs has been directed to minority and gateway city and immigrant businesses. But what I would say, Jim, the compelling part of this is the multiple factor when you're dealing with low interest loan programs and capitalization of community loan programs and CDFIs, community banks, basically. Yeah. So, $1 million deposit in a CDFI can have a 5, 10, 15x multiple years down the road. That's compelling when you've got, a relatively limited scope of resources that you're dealing with.
Segun, if I can, you mentioned restaurants a minute ago. Nia Grace was here the other night, obviously Daryl's and her new place also, but she was also the co-founder of the Boston Black Hospitality Coalition. I asked her, this is the other end of the spectrum, not government, people like me who talk a good game about patronizing businesses owned by people of color. I'm not sure we walk the walk all the time. She actually said that the words were being matched by a lot of customers, that we said the right thing and that we actually did a lot of the right thing. Quickly, if you can, is that your experience? Are we matching our talk with action?
Well, for restaurants, sure, we see a lot more folks that are taking advantage of Black and brown restaurants in the area. But the problem is that there are rising costs for these restaurants. And so even though customers are matching their words with actions, it's not really helping the bottom line for these businesses.
Fair enough, Segun. Good luck with your case here. And Senator Lesser, I really appreciate your time. Good luck with your efforts convincing your colleagues as well. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.